On Sundays like today, Trinity Sunday, I find myself feeling grateful that this particular series has a very specific theme. Ashley Wilcox titled her book The Women's Lectionary, Preaching the Women of the Bible Throughout the Year. That's what drew me in. If you've been watching from the beginning, you know that the book alone, though, is not what brought us to this place. This series is the work of the Spirit and the Spirit alone. Pause here. If you've not already, read the texts listed in the description, and then come on back and I'll tell you more. In preparation for the typical Trinity Sunday, one might find pastors feverishly researching the latest skits available to explain this phenomena of the relationship of the three in one, or attempting to take the most laborious theological explanation and transform it into something that won't leave the people scratching their very sore heads or falling asleep. I've witnessed it. I've participated in it. But this year is different. Let's back up for the benefit of those who are just joining the ride for the first time. As I said a moment ago, I purchased Wilcox's book because of the title. What I didn't expect is what Spirit was going to do when I received it and started thumbing through it. Without any warning, I found myself marking dates in the top corners of each week's and holy days pages to keep me on track for a sermon series that I had just challenged, that Spirit truly had just challenged me to take on. The challenge is simply this: each week, preach on at least one of the two texts that Wilcox has for the given week or holy day, using only those texts and her reflections. Sounds simple. There was a twist, though. Regardless of the story or stories, it feels crucial to me to uplift the called who have long been hidden or silenced. And that goal means reading the texts through a very particular lens. The beauty of the ride thus far has been a mixture of met expectations and genuine surprises. I look forward to the next 46 weeks, sermons, plus random holy days thrown in there, to see what else is ahead of us. So, Trinity Sunday, but through the lens of the women referenced in the texts and or the hidden or silenced but still called who need to be uplifted as reminded to us in these texts. It's an interesting edge to the challenge. In preparation, I repeatedly found myself going back to the default of, how do I explain the Trinity, rather than through the lens of this challenge. So after some deep breaths and pauses of my own, Spirit did what Spirit does, and here we are. Today is not about the how. Today is about what I believe it should always be about, and that is the why. Why the Trinity? Why, in a book subtitled Preaching the Women of the Bible, is there a week with two passages that don't ever directly mention a particular woman or group of women? Let's start with question 1. Why the Trinity? Not in a grand philosophical, theological sense, but in a, seriously, why the Trinity? God is God and could have chosen to reveal God's self to humanity in any manner, provided any description. So why these descriptors of God, Son, Spirit? As cliched and Sunday school as it seems, the answer is love. God created us. Therefore, God knows the complexities and limits of our minds. God knows the nuances of our hearts and the ways our brains can get us twisted up into knots. God knows there will be times we need to turn and walk away. God knows God's children, and therefore, out of God's vast love for us, gave us a vast multitude of ways to connect and receive. God, creator of the universe, sometimes that's just too big, too much. Though that same God created me individually with my own purpose and call, that's difficult to fathom. But when I have a person like Jesus to turn to, a person to me at least, is approachable and real, invested and wanting to hear what I have to say, makes the approach a little easier. And I think God gives us the Spirit for a couple of reasons. First, throughout the Old Testament and highlighted at Pentecost, the Spirit of God rests upon those through whom God is about to do something far beyond the limits of humanity. But it's not the only role of the Spirit. Spirit also guides people in a unique way. I can't explain it. If you've had that moment of truly feeling the Spirit upon you, you know what I mean. There are times when I pray that the Spirit is there in such a concrete way. I feel different, almost transcendent or straddling two worlds. There are times I feel nudges to do something that seems a bit illogical, yet necessary, kind of like this series. When I'm not tuning it out, when I'm obedient to it, the reasons become clear. Why the Trinity? In short, because God created us to be complex beings who need to be able to relate to God from different vantage points depending on what's happening in our lives at the time. Sometimes we need to call upon the creator of the universe because we need that power. Sometimes we need to pray to and sit with the friend who is filled with empathy and compassion, who can't always fix the issues, who maybe chooses not to always fix the issues, but every time, every single time, leaves you feeling seen and heard. And sometimes it's the ethereal, the connection point between here and there, between now and what is still to come, that inner peace. Sometimes that's what we need. And so we have the Spirit. The answer to our second question builds upon this one. As the Bible was taken from the story circle, telling generation to generation to generation, to the written word, those tasked to do so, I would argue by the Spirit, had a lot of decisions and choices to make when it came to the words to use. Creation, if you read it closely, is described akin to birthing, an inherently female experience. The Spirit, also translated wind or breath, is a female Hebrew word. These are all choices, ways the writers needed to somehow convey what was experienced and passed through the generations that would be both impactful and lasting. Images from all of the image possibilities. Birthing, female breath, creative breath. That's what was chosen. And then God creates humanity in God's image, both male and female. God's image, both male and female. Are today's passages about specific women? No. and yes. Who added the male pronouns to God? Humanity. The same humanity who, I believe, because of the brokenness of this world, created a patriarchal system from which everything else is built, language included. For those who feel that maybe goes a step too far, I want you to think about something. When talking about God, the male pronoun rolls easily off the lips. In even the most progressive congregations, God and He are equivalent a lot of the time. How often, though, have you heard Spirit referenced with a feminine pronoun? You see the conundrum we're about to spin into? I can hear someone saying, well, that doesn't actually mean a woman. It's just a classification. Oh, okay. So that applies across the board. Anytime there's a gender-associated noun, verb, word, it's not really meant to be a he or she that we use to describe it? No? Okay. You see how this falls apart? We could spin into oblivion on this, but that just takes us too far off track. Instead, let's narrow it down to a very simple gift. This week's passages are not about a singular woman or group of women from the Bible. Rather, they're about the fact that God is both gendered and beyond gender, that male and female are words assigned to the first two beings by the people tasked to finally write these things down, to differentiate, maybe, but I think more importantly, to encapsulate that God is both of these things, but also so much more. Created in God's image, an image that is so complex that when it is reflected, i.e. through a human being, it cannot be simplified or limited to one label. God is three in one: creator, sustainer, savior. God is three in one. They. To love God, to know God, cannot be to remove those pieces of God. To love God, to know God, to see God in oneself and in others is to seek out and embrace the fullness of God. Recognizing that God's love and call reaches deep and far, far beyond all of the boxes and constructs that we insist on throwing humanity into when God says, break them all down. Why is she speaking? Because she has been an active, vocal, equal part of God since before creation. She is a part of the three in one. Because her voice stirred over the waters and later gave power to speak in any needed tongue. Because God created her with a purpose that earthly constructs will no longer silence or hide. Because she is a part of God's reflection. She is called. They are called. We are speaking.